Hi, Mark Hayward here, Comedy Yo-Yo Man. I'm going to make a stand for my grandfather's World War II helmets. I'm also going to tell you what I know about their stories. So I inherited these two helmets from my grandfather. He served in the auxiliary police in Los Angeles in 1942, and I figured it'd be really cool to have these on display. So I'm going to make a mannequin head so that I can have these out and see them in my workshop. I'm not really sure how big to make the mannequin head, so I have to do some measuring. That one doesn't help. I'm trapped. I'm using some plywood that I salvaged out of the dumpsters when the college students moved out of the dorms. So it's got some graffiti that I know nothing about. I guessed the height that I wanted, partly based on this piece of scrap that I have. I'm measuring out the width of the inside of the helmet. And for the second piece, I'm measuring the length of the inside of the helmet. The next step is I'm going to freehand draw the silhouette of the head, both from the front and from the side. I wanted to make sure that the silhouette of the head is at least pretty close to symmetrical, so I traced the one side with this piece of tracing paper, trimmed off the edge, then flipped it over so I can check the other side and make them fairly close. My grandfather was an auxiliary police officer in Los Angeles in 1942, and he was too old to be drafted, and he had a family. So that really pushed him down the line of the drafting list. Plus he was a teacher, which may have had an effect. He had this helmet as part of his uniform as an auxiliary policeman. His job was to patrol and be sure that the lights were out so that the city couldn't be seen by enemy bombers. This was a time before radar, so pilots just looked for targets out the window. And if they could see any light, that's where they would drop bombs. My grandfather told me a story about one time when he was out on his rounds in the neighborhood and he saw some light coming from one of the houses. He knocked on the door to see what the situation was, and it turned out the family was huddled in their kitchen around their refrigerator, and they had the door open just like an inch to give them a little bit of light to feel a little bit more safe. But it was still enough light that it could be seen outside the house and possibly from the air. So he had to tell them they had to close the refrigerator, they had to turn that light off. His full uniform included this helmet and a cloth hat. Presumably he didn't wear the helmet all the time, as well as a wool jacket, an armband, and a baton. Unfortunately, in that era, my family didn't own a camera, so we don't have any pictures of my grandfather in his uniform. In order to make these two pieces slot together well, the slot has to be on the top half of one of them and on the bottom half of the other. And you got to make sure the slot goes no less than halfway. I'm making these go just slightly more than halfway. And you also want to make sure that the slot is fairly snug so there's no wiggle room once you put the two pieces together. You're cutting a line that has curved concave sections, it's really valuable to cut relief cuts to the lowest point of that curve so that when you're cutting along the line, Once you get to that point, the waste will just fall away. This is an M1917 helmet. This style was used in combat until 1942, when it was passed down for use in civilian service. I got this helmet along with the police helmet from my grandfather when he passed away. This is probably World War I surplus, issued in the first part of World War II. Unfortunately, no one in my family knows the story of this helmet, but my best guess is it's hand-painted camouflage. You can see the brush strokes very clearly on this. It's obviously done by hand. And camouflage was the major new trend in military technology at that time. The paint is in great shape, so I doubt that this was used in service. It could have been modified right before the more modern M1 helmet was issued and just never used. It's also possible, and probably more likely, that this helmet was painted to make it a better, more valuable war trophy sold to a returning soldier, and it never saw service after it was painted. But there's really no way to know. I mean, camouflage was the exciting new thing, so it stands to reason that if a soldier had been issued a plain color helmet and knew that camouflage was something that could possibly save his life, it's entirely possible that he could have painted it himself. The more I've thought about it, the more I think this helmet couldn't have been used in combat, because the paint is so shiny, and that would have been a dead giveaway to the enemy. The only thing I know for sure is that my grandfather did not serve overseas, so he didn't wear this in service. But other than that, I don't know. Maybe he got it from a friend. I wish I knew, but it's pretty cool. When you're trying a new technique, it's important to do some tests, to make some samples. I was hoping that when I put the spray paint onto the board, that some of the original magic marker graffiti, that the pigment might bleed through the paint and look really cool. But I wanted to check and see how it would work. So I did a couple tests. I used regular spray paint on one piece of scrap, and I used the spray paint with the primer included on another piece. And it turns out that it bled through the regular paint really well. So in my final result, I ended up doing 3 coats of the regular spray paint and then a coat of the spray paint with primer over the top to get the look that I really wanted. Camouflage was just starting to be used in World War I. It was mostly used on vehicles and structures pretty extensively for those things throughout all of World War I, but for uniforms, it was mostly at the end of the war. The US started issuing camouflage uniforms during World War II. While I was researching this helmet, I learned about Dazzle Camouflage. If you haven't already seen it, it's pretty amazing. The idea was to confuse rather than conceal, so it was usually used on ships and on other large vehicles. And the idea with ships was that the torpedo technology at the time meant that the torpedoes traveled very slowly. So the person firing the torpedo had to aim way ahead of the ship in order to connect at the right time. So they had to know the speed and the bearing of the ship, and also, most importantly, which direction it was going in. So the Dazzle Camouflage, the point of it was to throw off the person looking through the scope, trying to figure out where to aim the torpedo. It's so amazing looking, and so it makes sense when I learned that it was created by teams of artists, probably inspired by cubists and modernists, who were already working on ways to disguise the form. Unfortunately, it's unclear how effective it was, but it looks awesome. And while it was used extensively through the war, it was made obsolete toward the end by new technology like radar, which didn't really care what color a ship was painted. When designing the painting schemes for the Dazzle Camouflage ships, no two ships were painted the same way, so the Germans couldn't recognize a type and know what kind of ship they were dealing with. Plus, on each ship, the port and starboard side were painted differently. The National Archives has some really cool images of the designs for ships with Dazzle Camouflage. If you'd like to see more, please check out the link in the video description. In 1919, the Chelsea Arts Club in England held a Dazzle Camouflage costume ball. It got an incredible amount of attention in the press because Dazzle Camouflage was something that the public was really fascinated by. Several of the artists who were part of the Dazzle Camouflage groups with the military went on to do extensive paintings involving ships and Dazzle Camouflage after the war. I know what you're thinking. Mark, this project's so easy. How could anyone mess it up? Well, you could do this. You could just cut the line not in the center of one of the panels. Totally not how you do it. This distance should be equal to this distance, because heads are symmetrical. We all know that camouflage is used extensively in modern times by hunters. But both Dazzle and regular camouflage are used quite a bit in regular life. Here, my professional juggler friends have adapted Dazzle to make an impression. Camo now is used for decorative things, but also is very much a part of fashion. As always, if you like what I'm doing here, please subscribe to my channel. It actually helps me out a lot to have subscribers. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments in the comment section. If you'd like to make one of these yourself, you can download the plans for free on my website, markhayward.net. Just click on the link for the store.